that's focused on the history of this rather remarkable railroad and railroad station that we are in right now. But we're going to be talking about what's happening today and what we hope will be happening in the months and years ahead. My name's Karen Christensen. I am not a professional train person. I stumbled into this, God help me, 10 years ago. If I had known it would take this long, I would never have got started. But fortunately, I didn't know. And I got encouragement in early days from people locally and actually people all over the world who said, yeah, why doesn't America have trains? You know, and so anyway, it's like a train. The train campaign has taken on a momentum of its own. I will be filling you in on some of the more recent events, especially in terms of federal legislation at the end. But I have three truly remarkable and different speakers for you today. I'm really delighted. I have to offer Maria Horns, the representative for this area, I have to offer her regrets. She had a very minor medical procedure this week, but was advised that she should not go out today. So in her place, we have someone else who, actually, the last time I saw you, you and I and Maria were hanging out 2 years ago at Railroad Days, right?
Yeah.
Christian Allen, who is a select board member here in Canaan and a local business owner, who I met in 2015 when we had a January rally for the rail out here in the station, which had not yet been renovated. It's a lot warmer today than it was then. What was the temperature?
Like 5 degrees.
Yeah. So very nice. So he's going to give us a picture from this part of the world. And then I am absolutely delighted to have my friend, Representative Smitty Pignatelli from Berkshire County, who is my representative in the Massachusetts legislature, and who has been a leader in many areas, certainly from infrastructure-related issues to social issues and environmental issues. And because any project like this, any rail project in the States, it is about systems and about interstate connectivity, but our project perhaps more than many other smaller projects. So we're just so pleased to have him. And then to bring us both a local and a global perspective, we have my friend, the author Simon Winchester, who I know has not yet written a book about trains, although he's tackled many other topics, but I am certainly, I'm pitching that one. But in any case, we'll get him to talk to us about trains that he has known and loved, and why we need trains here. So with no further ado, I'm going to, and we can have some, do we have some water? I just got some. Oh, great. For the speakers. Okay, that'd be great. Super. And I'm going to turn this over to Christian.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Karen, Smitty, Simon, and especially Maria Horn, who couldn't be here today, for all that you're doing to help make passenger service on the Housatonic line a reality once again. As Karen mentioned, back in 2015, 100 people gathered in this depot when it was empty and unfinished on a January frozen day morning to rally and demand passenger service be restored on this line. On that day, a spry 19-year-old gave a speech in support of this effort that all of us have worked so hard to achieve. In part, that speech led me to become North Canaan's youngest selectman and has allowed me the opportunity to help finish this depot, open this wonderful brewery and event space we're gathered in today, and especially assist in the design of the railroad crossing project that you can see underway just outside. And that project will provide a rail bed that is capable in handling passenger service into the future. As a young person, what I could tell you today, but what I will not elaborate on today, is how my generation is driving less and before COVID was leaving this area. But I am here to talk today about the real future of our region, and especially North Canaan. The future that we make now. You all in the crowd know how special and really magical North Canaan and this region is in the world. There's really no place like it. Where in the world can you find a fully restored iron furnace that is the state of Connecticut's sole industrial monument? Where else can you find a public high school as beautiful as Housatonic Valley Regional High School, which was designated in 2017 as the most beautiful public high school in Connecticut by Architectural Digest, and the first regional high school in New England? Where else can you find the world's largest Victorian train station in which we're sitting in today? It's nowhere else but here. But all these material things, so they are important and we cherish them and have worked to restore them. There's something here that all those things can never be. It's the culture and soul of this region. And that's really what this gathering is about today and what the Train campaign has worked to enhance. When this rally was held here in 2015, friends of mine from Yukon were looking forward to coming here this weekend to see this little corner of the world. And unfortunately, there was a leadership conference scheduled for that Saturday that was pushed to that day, and they couldn't make it. All of them said to me, it must be hard to choose between coming back here to this rally or going to that leadership conference. Well, folks, you know what I said? Do you know what's hard? When you're 6 years old, and a month after the attempt to topple the economic, social, and cultural structure of your country in 9/11, you're standing in the economic, social, and cultural structure of your hometown. You know what's hard? Seeing the project that rebuild that structure in which we are in today linger on for more of half of my life because there just isn't anyone. And you know what's hard? The hardest thing of all? Seeing the people of your hometown lose hope and believe the best days of our region, and especially North Canaan, are behind us. After that, my friends pushed to get that conference canceled, not for themselves, but that I was free to come there that day. And they succeeded. I have a little story to go along with that. 15 years ago, my siblings' parents and grandparents at their home in East Canaan, directly opposite of Elm Knoll's milk sign, had a good old meat, potato, and gravy dinner. Somehow, through conversation amongst us eating, my grandpa Paul, former first selectman of North Canaan, said, I don't think North Canaan will ever be great again. The eating stopped, and there was silence until I asked, well, what do you mean, Grandpa? He looked straight into my eyes and said, son, we've lost our town. We've lost our station. We're going to lose the people who built this town. I said, who's that? My grandpa interjected and said, my grandma interjected, and she said, Paul, the grandkids shouldn't hear this. And he stopped her, no, Lee, they have to hear this. And that's when he listed off so many names over, we all froze to death by said them. Just to paraphrase, there were the people who got up every morning to tend the fields, the quarries and stores of this town. The people who would keep their restaurants open 24/7 because everybody needs a place. And the people that would get up every morning, ride their bike down to the Doy Boy right over here, and raise the American flag every day. Grandpa said all those people, if not already gone, would only have 10 years left, and then the town would die. And he said no one would ever believe in North Canaan again. There we were 10 years later, and what was left in 2015? He was mostly right. The train station was still gone. The train was still gone. Most of the people that were his age were gone. But after all those years, do you know what I'd say to him today? I tell you what, Grandpa, I believe in Canaan. Karen believes in Canaan. Maria believes in Canaan. And above all else, we're here today because of Canaan. And we won't let our town die in our hands because we care about each other, not just ourselves. And we care about the legacy of our ancestors. And we care about all who will come after us. what happened. 2 years later, in 2017, I was elected as a selectman. And since North Canaan has been on a tear, we, with a refreshed board of selectmen willing to work together with all the good people that make up this town, we succeeded in attracting so much investment in this town, but we're not done yet. To finish the good that has been started here, we need passenger service. We need that direct line to New York and Boston so that the good people of this world can see all that North Canaan and this region has to offer. And in conclusion, as I said in 2015, and as many of you continue to do, we will write the letters, make the calls, raise the money, create the laws, sow the seeds, plant the trees, and build up each other to reap the skills and talents we have, to bring this town back, to bring the train back, to bring this station back even better than it is today, and make North Canaan and all of our region better than it's ever been, which is the way it was always meant to be. Thank you. And with that, Smitty. Thank you.
Wow, next time I'm going first. That was terrific. And I just met Christian on my way in here today, and thank you for the special visa to get over the border here this morning.
Yeah, you got it.
I won't stay too long.
We're not building a wall anytime soon here.
I love your words because I think you and I have an awful lot in common where, you know, I was a young selectman many years ago, and now I'm an old state rep, but I always believe elected officials, especially at the local level, need to understand and appreciate the history so you can prepare for today and have the vision for tomorrow. So I'm glad that you've embraced your grandfather's beautiful view of Canaan and North Canaan and what this rail could do for so many. So really, another round of applause for this young man. I love it when young people get involved and they don't get too disengaged with government and they get too cynical of government. I really believe that you can make a difference here in your hometown, and you're certainly doing that. So if anything I can ever do to help you along the way, my dad would always tell me that the issues really never change, only the faces. Yes, only the faces. So Karen, thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm happy to be anywhere actually with real people. So like many of you, for the last year and a half, we've been seeing faces on these 2x2-inch screens on a Zoom call. So it's really nice to see people live and in person, and something that's so important, this rail. Karen, I have to be very honest with you. Karen is like a dog on a bone. She's a bulldog, and I mean this in the greatest admirable way I can. Karen has latched onto this thing and has driven this agenda in the Southern Berkshires in my district for a long time. There's a lot of us, I myself included, that, hey, is it really going to happen? Is this possible? It's going to cost a lot of money. Well, we can't do much without Connecticut. It's a good opportunity for Massachusetts and Connecticut to work together, and maybe Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York ultimately. But we kept watching her. We kept watching what she was doing, and I'm a believer. I'm a believer because of Karen Christensen. So thank you for inviting me here to be here today with all of you wonderful people. So I love Christian's historical perspective, and I'll give you a quick little history snapshot of me. Born and raised in Lenox. I grew up in a town where we were a bedroom community to General Electric. We had paper mills galore all throughout the Berkshires. In my district alone, which is from Lenox south down to the Sheffield, Connecticut state line, the town of Lee alone. Now the town of Lee has about 5,000 people that live there full-time right now. At one point in time, believe it or not, folks, 4,000 people worked at paper mills in the town of Lee. 10 or 11,000 people work at General Electric in Pittsfield. The town of Lee has one paper mill left, employing about 150 people. General Electric is long gone. We have General Dynamics, knock on wood. But we've had to transform our economy to the travel and tourism economy that it is. But I remember growing up hearing the stories from my dad about the romanticism, and I'll call it the romanticism of rail, how important it was to the Berkshires. and how the Berkshires were called the Inland Newport. You know, the rich and famous, the Westinghouses and the Vanderbilts had homes in Lenox and Stockbridge, and they would come up here and spend the summers there. The Inland Newport, they called it. And then I think about stories even further back, about my immigrant grandparents who came through Ellis Island like many of our ancestors. My grandparents actually settled in New Jersey for a very short period of time. And because of the lack of work, and they heard about these McMansions being built in the Berkshires, my grandfather moved his family to Lenox and raised 8 kids, and all went on to be very successful. My grandfather, I'll never forget, he worked at what is now Canaan Ranch, which was a private estate, Bellefontaine. He worked there for 55 years. He was a head greenhouse person. The most money he ever made in his life was $90 a month. But yet he raised 8 children, was very successful. I was a selectman many years ago. My dad was a selectman before. And I never ever remember him speaking a word of English. But he knew everything that was going on. He came to the Berkshires by rail. The rich and famous came to the Berkshires by rail. Why can't we bring rail back? Now, when I first got elected to the legislature nearly 20 years ago, it seems like yesterday. Some people think it's too long, but I think I'm just getting started. It would take me about 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes to drive to Boston. Now it's 2:45 to 3, sometimes 3.5. There's more cars on the road than ever before. I actually enjoyed it a little bit during the pandemic, where I could get there in about less than 2 hours because nobody was getting out of the house. Well, I had to go to Lawrence for a grant that I've been working on for about 8 years in the town of Lee for the Eagle Mill development, an old paper mill that's been run down and fallen into disrepair. And it took me 3 hours to get there, and I was amazed how many cars and trucks were on the road. And that's when I go back to Karen about pushing this commuter rail. And I've long envisioned this, I coined the phrase west-east. A lot of my Boston folks call it the east-west rail, and I say call it west-east, because I really believe if you start in the Berkshires, it will get to Boston, much like the Mass Turnpike. The Massachusetts Turnpike started in West Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and it made it to Boston. If we don't start in western Massachusetts, I don't believe we're ever gonna see it get all the way to Boston. But if it only gets to Worcester, we win. We win, because there's already a rail from Worcester to Boston. And right in the middle of Albany, New York, and Boston, and Hartford, Connecticut, we are an economic hub of activity. 2 or 3 hour drives from our center home base. It has endless possibilities. And if I could be in a train, a high-speed train with Wi-Fi capabilities, and it's still, if it took me 3 hours to get to the State House in Boston, but I have a productive 3 hours of work, that's time well spent. The 6 hour round trip I made to Lawrence the other day, I got home and I had 225 emails that I hadn't been able to see yet. I had 22 text messages, and I had 12 voicemails. Those are all things I could have done if I was on a working mode of transit. And I think that's what the rail could do. And I really believe that Albany, Berkshire, Springfield, Worcester, Boston, that economic corridor, east-west and west-east, could be very beneficial to all of us in the Berkshires. And I believe that Pittsfield could be that north-south connector, much like Springfield has become the north-south connector to Greenfield and Hartford, Worcester, north and south, Boston, north and south. Why can't the Berkshires be a legitimate north-south hub, a regional hub of economic activity? My dad was a big Yankee fan. I think I can say that down here. Is that pretty much okay?
Yeah.
No, not really. Still mixed, okay. But before the Mass Turnpike was built, my father had said it would take 4 or 5 hours to drive to Boston to go to a game at Fenway Park. But he could hop on a train or actually drive to New York City in less than 3 hours. And I think being an Italian, I think the Italian-American heritage and connection with the New York Yankees, with Joe DiMaggio, my dad's favorite ball player, and Tony Lazzeri, Yogi Berra, and the list goes on and on. I think they became a lot of Yankee fans. And there's more Red Sox fans on the Berkshires today since they won the World Series finally in 2004. But I think that connection of transit, being able to come down and not spend 4 or 5 or 6 hours in a car, really made a difference to a lot of people. We've seen the Berkshires change, we've seen North Canaan change. but I think there's a great opportunity to form a partnership, to develop some synergy. And I really look forward to the day where I can hop on a train that I don't have to drive to Wasaig to, which is fine, I've done it, that I don't have to drive to Hudson, New York, which I've done. I can get on a train in Lenox or Great Barrington and get to New York City. Or hop on a train in Lenox or Great Barrington and get to Boston or to Albany, New York, and on and on. So I think there's endless possibilities. I think this crowd is terrific. I think it's an indication that the time has come. We can talk about things for so long, or we can start doing them. Karen is pushing hard. It's hard to say no to this young lady, but we're going to get it done. And I really believe that with all the federal dollars that we have coming into our states, Connecticut and New York and Massachusetts, I think it's an opportunity to make sure it stays on top of mind awareness for Representative Maria Horn, myself, our senators, and everybody, and more importantly, our governors, that we get our fair share of the dollars that are going to be allocated, and we make an investment for the next 100 years. I'll call it a generational investment, maybe a multi-generational investment. We're not going to see this kind of dollars probably in my lifetime ever again from the federal government. Infrastructure is critically important. We can drive on beautifully paved roads. We can look at our town halls and look at our bridges and see the paint chipping off and say, what's wrong with you, selectmen? What's wrong with you, state rep? Paint the damn building, paint the bridge. But what's underneath, the very infrastructure that we're driving on, we have discovered are 120-year-old water and sewer pipes. That's the infrastructure investment we need to make. And I'll close with, I remember taking my kids, my son is 32 now, my daughter's 27, on the Berkshire Scenic Railroad, and I see there's a couple of guys here right now. And I remember hopping on the train in Lenoxdale, Massachusetts, and going to Great Barrington, and then coming back. And then a couple years later, because of the condition of the track, we would go to Stockbridge, and then we would come back. And then because of the condition of the rail, it went from Lenoxdale to Lee, and then we came back. And then it got to the point where, because of the condition of the track, it went about 1,000 feet down the track in Lenoxdale, and it came back. We, the state of Massachusetts, bought that rail. We now own it. We have the assets to it. We're gonna get the Berkshire Scenic Railroad back on that track. But what we've done since we bought it under the Deval-Patrick administration, and now under Governor Charlie Baker's administration, we're spending millions, tens of millions of dollars, not only fixing the rail beds, the ties, and the rail, the iron rail itself. We're ready to work with Connecticut. Connecticut's willing to work with us. We're willing to work with you guys. Let's get this thing done once and for all. I think it's an economic generator, not only creating jobs, but economic opportunities. Why can't I live in the Berkshires or North Canaan and work in the city? Why can't I live in the Berkshires and work in Albany, New York, or Boston, Massachusetts? Live here, work there. I think those are realistic possibilities. And with the proper investment, I think we can do that very much. So I thank Karen for inviting me. Christian, I admire this young person getting involved. I think it's critically important. You know, don't get discouraged. Just remember one thing that my sister told me a long time ago. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
too many times, I'm still young. I like to think I'm still young, but we want things right away. We want things right away, and it doesn't happen fast enough. Believe me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But don't give up on the marathon. It doesn't stop at the 26-mile marker. You have to run through the other point two to make it to make it to the finish line. So I admire all the people that are being here today. Great admiration for Karen, for her tenacity to keep it on people's minds. Simon, I mean, you are a gifted author and a storyteller, and I look forward to hearing from you as well. But I think the time has come. Let's do it. Let's do it together. Let's do it right. Let's not shortchange ourselves. It's not about me necessarily, but my children, my grandchildren, and their grandchildren. Thereafter, they're going to look back on this day like you did with your grandfather and say, you know what? We made a difference. And if elected officials at all levels spend more time thinking about the next generation and not the next election, we'd all be in better shape in this country. Imagine what we could do if we thought more about the next generation than the next election. And I tell my staff every week, if we do our jobs every single day, I truly believe in my heart that the next election will take care of itself. And it doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, doesn't mean we're going to agree on every process and possibility that's going to come across the way, but just do your job every day. Think about the next generation. You know what? Town Hall in Lenox is dedicated to my father, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And there's a lot of people in Lenox that don't know who Johnny Pignatelli was. He was okay with that. He was okay with that because he knows what he did, and the people that he helped knew what they did, know what he did. He says, I sleep very well at night. I tell young people all the time, I've been in this office for nearly 20 years. It's really a blip on the radar map when you think about it. You're looking at a country that's 250 years old. 20 years is not a very long time. But my dad would always tell me, what are you going to do with your blip? Think about that. What are you going to do with your blip? What I want to do with my blip is have an infrastructure, transportation infrastructure that's second to none, that will be there for hundreds of years. That's the kind of investment we need to make, and with your support, I think we can get it done. So I look forward to working with Christian and Karen and Simon and all of you to say, hey, the time has come. I was looking forward to meeting Representative Horn, and I look forward to doing that in the future. But let's get our political powers to be, recognize the money that's coming into our area. Let's make an investment, and not just in the big cities, but in the small towns like North Canaan and the small towns like Lenox. And we're going to do much better. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here. And I have the pleasure of introducing this man who's a rock star. His wife's a bigger rock star.
Yes.
Simon Winchester, a dear friend to all of us. Thanks for being here.
Well, Karen, and first of all, Christian, amazing talk, and if only we had selectmen in Sandersfield that had the energy and youth that you represent. This is great. Also, the most encouraging thing, Karen, in your address at the beginning was that I remember when we first met and I listened to you, as you say, like a dog with a bone, just wrestling with getting everything out of it possible. You were talking about in the days ahead, in the weeks ahead, in the months ahead, in the years ahead, and the decades ahead. Now you've dropped the word decades, because it is becoming a possibility, a probability now, thanks to the energy of our politicians, like you guys. The money is going to be released, and we're going to see track laid, ties reinforced, cement replacing old wooden sleepers. We call them sleepers in England, I have to. And I'm going to tell, what I was going to do initially when I was driving down here in the car was just tell you some stories about railways, because I've spent an awful lot of my life traveling on trains all around the world. But in fact, because we in England are in much the same shape, or were in much the same shape that you are in now, I was going to tell you something about that situation. Although first of all, very briefly, some things that I remember from train travel I've taken, well, in this country. I remember vividly, I went to the first Bob Dylan concert in Chicago after he recovered from his motorcycle accident, and decided to come back to, I was living in Washington DC at the time, come back on the train, the James Whitcomb Riley, I think it was, a named train, how lovely they were, like the Berkshire Flyer, the Berkshire, whatever they're called, the Snow Express and so forth. And we were talking about snow. We were stuck on this train in Logansport, Indiana, I remember, in a snowdrift for 18 hours. And it was me and a showgirl from Las Vegas who was coming from Vegas to West Virginia, terrified of airplanes. So she took the train from Vegas to Chicago, changed, we met. It was an amusing 18 hours. For both of us, I like to think. India, I lived in India for many years. The kind of things, the train network that was left behind, I have to say, by the British. With these wonderful names, the Bombay, Baroda, and Orient Express. Marvelous trains they were. I remember once going from Delhi, I think, to Calcutta on a slowish train. And the waiter came up to me somewhere in northern Uttar Pradesh and said, would I be taking dinner? And I said, I would love me, could I take your order? And so I ordered chicken curry or whatever. and below me down, the train accelerated quite significantly for about 50 miles, I suppose. And we drew up at a station, Lucknow, I think it was, and they said, we're now going to wait here for half an hour while you have your dinner. And on the platform, there was a table and a laid with linen and a beer and chicken curry and a couple of waiters. And I sat there, please take your time, sir. The train will make up speed when we continue to go. And I thought, I'm in total heaven. It's just the kind of thing that could only never get it on an aeroplane today. And I also, when I went to live in Hong Kong, I decided to go by train. And so I thought I'd be a smart ass, if you like, and buy the ticket at Liverpool Street, which is in East London, the departure station. And so there were people standing in the line before the ticket counter asking for season tickets to Ongar or Epping, suburban London stations. And then it was my turn, and I said, a one-way first class to Hong Kong. And without missing a beat, the ticket inspector said, oh yes, is that via Irkutsk or Cheetah? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, sunshine, before you ask for a ticket, make sure you know where you're going. So I'm embarrassed, humiliated. I stepped back and looked at the map and found indeed I was going via Cheetah. And he sold me the ticket there and then. So I had this huge ticket, it cost about £500, I think. And the journey was amazing. It was Liverpool Street to Harwich, ferry, Harwich to Hook of Holland to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Moscow, suburban train to the big station in the east of Moscow, and then the long journey across Siberia to then Cheetah, which is where I changed. And then you go down to Mongolia through Ulaanbaatar, where I had friends and stayed with them for a while. And then you have this extraordinary thing when you pass from Mongolia into China. I don't know whether you've seen this, Karen, because you've traveled a lot by train in China. The Russian trains are 6 foot wide, the track, and then you have to change the bogies when you get into China, where, like us, 4 feet 8.5, and I don't know if you know where that track width that you see outside you now derives from the width of the Pompeii. The chariot wheels happen to be 4 foot 8.5, and where they're preserved by the eruption of Vesuvius, that is the width of railways nearly everywhere in the world, but not in Russia. And so these enormous Russian trains come into the station at the border with China, and they're lifted up, and the bogies are detached, and new bogies, now 4 feet 8.5, the train is lowered down onto them, and down it goes to, in my case, Peking, or Beijing, and Shanghai, and then ultimately to Hong Kong. So platform 9, Liverpool Street, to platform 2, Kowloon, Hong Kong. Easy journey to make. Get your facts right before you turn up and ask for the ticket. However, all this is totally irrelevant, because what I wanted to tell you about was how we in Britain became, as an act of government policy, in much the same position that you're suffering here in the States today. But it is being reversed, and that's the important thing, because it will be here, I'm certain, thanks to people like the 3 of you sitting here today. I went to boarding school in Dorset, which is in southwest England, in that long peninsula which juts out to the bottom left. And I would go every term from Paddington Station, where the bear comes from, and it was the 12:30 departure. I remember it vividly because they were almighty trains, the Great Western Railway, beautiful green and gold livery, the brassware had been polished because the engine drivers, engineers as you call them here, loved their trains, looked after them lovingly. The train departed at 12:30. It stopped at a place called Castle Carey in Wiltshire because you had to go onto a slightly more local train, to a place called Maiden Newton, and then there was a third change onto a tiny little branch line, which was about 15 miles long, to Bridport, where I went to school. And the stations, they had wonderful names for a start. Powerstock, Whitchurch Canonicorum, Tollerport Corum, Toller Frautrum, Bridport East, and then Bridport. And at each of these stations, the station masters tended their stations beautifully, little flower beds, and the waiting rooms were nice, and the clock was regularly wound. Everyone in the system took enormous pride in whatever their charge was, whether it was a railway train or whether it was a station. Those trains ran beautifully. There were thousands upon thousands of miles of line connecting tiny little places, whether from the north of Scotland, from John O'Groats down to Penzance, and including little places like Whitchurch, Canonicorum, which had a population of maybe 80, but it had a railway station. And then came this man, and I think this picture will, there he is. This man, lovely looking gentleman, is the villain of the piece. And if you can see him, not the nicest of faces, at least to people that love railway trains. He was a man called Lord Beeching, Beeching, and he was hired by the British government in 1965, having been chairman of ICI, Imperial Chemical Industries, to bring some sense to the British railway network, some economic sense, because it was run by the government, British Railways, and it didn't make money, it lost money. Railways are expensive things to run. And he decided, he brought out the Beeching Report, which is still a dagger in the heart of every rail fan all over the world. The Beeching Report recommended closures of hundreds upon hundreds of stations. 2,700 stations were closed almost overnight. 7,500 miles of line were shut down. 70,000 railroad employees were dismissed. And I remember vividly that line that I've described from Maiden Newton to Bridport. I remember the last train pulling out. And I remember the track uplaying trucks coming along and pulling up those rails 4 foot 8.5, and goodness knows melting them down and sending them to a foreign country, no doubt. And now the line was reduced to what you have in all too many places here, rail trails. You know, they grew over the flowers and nature took over the lines, the bridges, they had wild roses and gillyflowers, and they looked pretty enough, but you'd think now, 50 years later, why is that there? What was that bridge over? Well, it was over a railway line. And in their place, roads, divided highways, roundabouts, petrol stations, gas stations, here, congestion, traffic jams, noise, pollution, all sorts of unpleasant things. And that has been the situation for the last, well, the big closures were in the mid-1960s. Now, all of a sudden, that is being reversed. People are realizing, it took them 50 years, as they're realizing here, that rail makes sense. It's economical, it's beautiful too, it's romantic, and as Smithy says, you can sit there and do your emails. Of course, they didn't exist in the 1960s. You could write with a quill your handwritten address to your constituents. But you could have a cup of coffee on many trains in Britain, and a diminishing number in this country. You can have a decent drink. You can relax and watch the world go by and look down. I remember a Punch cartoon which would show a couple on the train saying, damn, the train is going to be 3 minutes late this morning, and looking out of the window and seeing an endless traffic jam with people furious because they were going to be hours late. So now, British government policy has changed. There's a huge amount of investment going into high-speed routes, I mean the major trunk routes, and of course the Chinese are past masters of this. I mean the Shanghai Canton railways are astonishingly fast. Billions of dollars being spent. This is, I mean, although Mr. Biden is showing some muscle in terms of demanding money for infrastructure, here it's going to be significant money, but it's not going to be impossible money. And significant money brings you back the kind of things that not London to Birmingham or London to Edinburgh, but things like New York to Danbury, to Canaan, to Sheffield, to Great Barrington, to Pittsfield, to Bennington. And that's what we need. It will change our lives in so many ways. It'll be a delight, it'll be economical, it'll be sustainable, it'll be pretty. So I applaud people like you, Christian, with your energy. Karen, words fail me. I mean, you have been amazing in your tenacity. That's Smithy, for God's sake. You know, we all know, up in Massachusetts. Are you a household word down here in Connecticut?
Not yet.
Well, you should. You will stick with it, pal. I just want to read a tiny, tiny poem to finish this off. This is, a few years ago, a friend of mine put together, asked a lot of distinguished and undistinguished people, like myself, to write about, it was a book called 100 Poems That Make Grown Men Cry. And we had Bill Clinton, and we had got prize winners, and we had various poets and things, all contributing a poem that they loved. And this tiny little poem, it might mean a great deal to you because it's full of English words and sentiments and things, but it means a lot to me as an expatriate Englishman. I'm now a citizen of this country and happy to do so, even though my citizenship was followed very swiftly by the election of the former president, which made me slightly wonder whether I'd done the right thing. But I'm here and I stuck with it and I'm happy I did. So this is a poem. It was written by a man called Edward Thomas, who was waiting on the Oxford to Worcester main line, another line which was torn up because of dreadful beaching, but is being rebuilt again because of the new money and the new good sense in England, in the English political scene. He wrote this poem about a train that stopped suddenly for no particular reason at a station and then moved off again. He was going off to meet his friend Robert Frost, the American poet, who happened to be living in Worcester at the time. And Edward Thomas wrote this poem and then went off to war in 1915 and a week later was killed. So this was the last poem he ever wrote. But to me, it sums up railways, it sums up an England that perhaps doesn't exist anymore, and it sums up a moment of beauty. So I won't bore you for more than a minute. I normally can remember it, but just in case. So it's called Adlestrop, which is Adlestrop, which is the name of a tiny little village in Gloucestershire. Yes, I remember Adlestrop, the name, because one afternoon of heat, the express train drew up there, unwontedly. It was late June. The steam hissed. Someone cleared his throat. No one left, and no one came on the bare platform. What I saw was Adlestrop, only the name. And willows, willow herb and grass, and meadow sweet and haycocks dry, no whit less still and lonely fair than the high cloudlets in the sky. And for that minute, a blackbird sang close by, and round him, mistier, farther and farther, all the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. That's what railways will bring you. So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Speechless. It was, can I say, guys? That was spectacular. You bring, all of you, brought so many things to mind.
Speak up.
What Christian, Smitty, and Simon have said have brought so many things to mind. I'm going to give you some practical, some information about what's actually going on now, and then we can certainly take some questions if you like. But I have to explain that I am someone, for all that I've become known as the train lady, I didn't ride a train until I was 19 years old and moved to England with my family. I grew up in the Silicon Valley. And I remember getting on that train and I didn't know how to ask for a ticket. And that was in 1976. And I heard about beaching. Loads of people would tell me about beaching because it was only 10 years, 11 years earlier that it all happened. But I cannot say that during those years, even though I lived in England for a long time and became really comfortable riding the train, it was very much part of life, a way of life. But it was after I rode the high-speed trains in China that, and rode to a rather remote rural, it's not rural, Hangzhou is not rural, but it's away, it's not one of the first cities you think of in China. But with a high-speed train, it was this absolutely beautiful place where there were big tech companies, world-famous tech companies. And I thought to myself, I'm a business owner. I have a small publishing company that works, and I work with a lot of people around the world. And I thought, wow, the Berkshires could be like this. The Berkshires, you know, people could just get on the train and come to visit or come to meetings. And so I came back from China And it was one of those pieces of synchronicity that just about that time, the Housatonic Railroad, whose freight trains you see outside, they had commissioned a couple of studies. One was on the economic impact in Connecticut and Massachusetts of restoring passenger service on this line. And also a market research survey to ask how many people would ride it and what they would want the service to include. So I heard that there was a meeting in Pittsfield at which they would be announcing some of their findings. And I was in New York, and so I came up by train, I hurried in, I got to the meeting a bit late, and I heard a fellow from the railroad explaining about this. And someone said, and how long will it take to get a service running on the line? And he said, 3 to 5 years. This was in 2011. And I had just come in, and I was sitting in a chair at the back, and I said, 5 years? And then up at the front, someone I couldn't see said, that has got to be Karen Christensen. So, anyway, I thought I could, I thought we would be able to do things faster, but it is difficult. I certainly knew nothing about this. I had learned a lot. And we are fortunate now that, there are silver linings. The pandemic has been extraordinarily difficult in so many ways. The economic ramifications and the personal losses that people have suffered, can't be overstated. But there are definitely some bright signs, and I think we have learned a lot. And so a couple of the developments, I do want to mention a couple of figures that came out in that early study, because they are significant now, and they're significant for Connecticut. One is that this was a study done by a professor at Williams College using standard economic development measurements, that the additional economic activity in Berkshire and Litchfield counties from the restoration of passenger train service would be $1 billion over 10 the first 10 years. That was in 2010. And the decrease in spending on traffic-related, on accidents and injuries, and road maintenance would be close to $1 million. $1 million over those 10 years. So there are significant reasons, economic reasons, to restore passenger service here. Well, why this train line? I have learned a lot about train projects around the country. There are hundreds of initiatives, some very large, some small like ours, some much smaller. Some are for 24 miles of line. And this project, I believe, offers the greatest return on investment of any project in the United States. It offers the fastest return on investment of any project in the United States. And it offers a model that will work in other places, because many of the challenges that we face here, even though I think that we have to say, certainly, it's an argument I've heard, the Berkshires is a very attractive, popular tourist destination. It doesn't have the same obvious economic difficulties that, say, certain parts of the Midwest have, or the South. But in fact, as anyone who's involved in local politics, and anyone who's got their eyes open knows that we live in an area where there are a lot of people who are struggling, and the jobs have gone away, the opportunity's not here, young people leave. So there are a couple things that are happening. There is continued effort in Massachusetts and actual restoration of the railroad line there, which you can go up and actually look at. We've been filming a bit of it, and we are going to be filming more because we're making a film, a documentary. But in addition to that, I had the privilege in March of joining a press conference with Senator Ed Markey and Representative Jim McGovern, who are announcing the Brain Train Act, which is one of the rail proposals that's being the infrastructure bills that are before us, or before our representatives in Washington. And that would specifically benefit projects like ours, designed to connect major cities with outlying regions for all the reasons that we've been talking about. Because there's benefit to these regions that often feel left behind. There's also benefit to cities in having easy connections. It's going to improve life. It's going to give quality of life to people. It's going to make it easier for the companies to attract talent. And that's an issue across the country. How do you make sure people come to Connecticut or to Massachusetts? You make it attractive for people to live here, and you make it possible for people to live here and have the kind of lives they want, to raise their families in the way they want to. And in addition to that, I've got a lot of maps back there. I'll be happy to talk to you about them. I am really delighted to say that one of the things that has been recently approved, voted for in the House of Representatives in Washington was an amendment to the American Jobs Plan, which would make the North Atlantic Rail Compact part of that major plan. And that is a proposal to build high-speed rail in New England. And that's what gets most attention. But the important piece of it for us here is that the people who have put this plan together recognize, as I think we all do, that rail is a system. It's not going from point A to point B and back, it's not going back and forth. I love the fact that the earliest trains that were just pulled by horses, and they did just go back and forth a couple of miles. And it's about a system. So that's where, when Smitty talks about Pittsfield being a transit hub, that's hugely important for Pittsfield. It's hugely important for people who will ride these trains. And for all the towns on it, there is an amplifying effect when you create a system. And that's what North Atlantic Rail, by identifying this particular line, because they see it as an important connector that spreads the system, that makes the system consistent. And the 2010 projection was 2 million single fares a year. This is an economically viable train line. Now, the challenge is, and this is the one thing I hear from people in Massachusetts, if I start talking to them about trains, the single fact that is most often lodged in their minds about this railroad is Connecticut doesn't care. We need to make sure that Connecticut cares and shows that it cares. And everyone here is, all of you who live in Connecticut are an important part of that. This is a project that requires the cooperation of states. That our federal leadership is going to be hugely important. They will absolutely drive it and spur activity, but it is also something that's going to have to be, we need top down and bottom up. We need the efforts of people like Christian here, like Smitty in the Berkshires, and every citizen who cares not just about being able to take the train themselves, but about the economic viability, the social fabric of the communities they live in. It's going to make this place a nicer place to live, more attractive to other people, far more vibrant, more interesting, and more beautiful, and without the negative consequences of the kind of economic growth that I now think of as being very 20th century. We want 21st century economic development that also takes into account climate change. Another very important, in fact, I just saw some figures from the UK that they're running a campaign to emphasize the fact that rail travel is contributes a quarter of the carbon emissions that car travel does. So we will, please, if you are not on the Train Campaign's mailing list, please just go to traincampaign.org and join, or I think we have an iPad here if write your name down and your email address. And we are quite, we will send you updates, and we have some online things as well. But how nice to see everyone in person. And I'm happy, and you know, this other speakers I'm sure will be happy to take questions for a few minutes now.
Hi, Catherine Payton from Falls Village. I have been wondering why we can't get a van or some transportation from Wassaic to, just even to Sharon. It's something about the states preventing any transportation across state
There
lines.
was, the Metro North actually ran a bus service from Wassaic up to the Berkshires, and that was done by them for a short period of time. I've never got the real, you know, any real solid information about why that was started or why it stopped. The interstate piece of it is always something of a challenge, and that is no reason that it wouldn't happen. Often what happens with these things is someone has to take the lead. Someone has to do it. And those of you who own a business know that starting any business, there are a variety of factors. And when it comes to transportation, there are regulations, there are insurance requirements. So there are complications. But of course, when we have trade service, we're going to want to have rental cars, aren't we, and car shares and other kinds of more 21st century ways of getting around. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity. Somebody needs to do it. Sure.
Hi, I'm Chad from New Milford. We actually drove up here to be a part of this. I wanted to first thank everybody of the speakers who's here for actually doing this. I grew up in New York. We all did. Where I grew up, there's trains everywhere. As you know, the New York City subway it goes every other block practically. So we were just wondering, what is the status on the Litchfield side from Danbury up to this point as far as the status of the funding and the implementation of the rail service?
There has been no funding allocated from Danbury up to the border, except for the improvement, I think it's 8.5 million on repairing some of the rail bridges. That is a piece that is dependent on either Connecticut legislation and the Connecticut Department of
Has there been any
Transportation.
talks about it?
There are certainly lots of talk. But the good news is that on the southern end, down in Danbury, there has been a great deal of interest in getting faster service to New York.
Yes, to southeast.
Yes. So there's efforts there, but I know there are people from hi Robert who are working to, you know, along the line. It's actually, the interesting thing is it's not that expensive a project. Now that we know that, because there's 37 miles of line owned by Massachusetts from the border up to Pittsfield, and then there's 37 miles owned by the state of Connecticut from the border down to New Milford. So it's exactly the same. And so we have actually a clear price comparison, and it's being done for roughly $30 million total.
Is there somebody we can write to?
Yes,
or-
there is, and we've compiled a list of all the newspaper editors and op-ed editors. So letters to the editor and opinions editors for a wide range of newspapers in here, as well as your legislators. So
And
yes, that you
that's
can.
on your website?
We're just about to release that, and we will send it by email, so make sure you have our email list. Because those letters are going to be very important, and we're also going to share, there is effort that what is now before Congress is something called the bipartisan infrastructure format, which is a bipartisan kind of compromise on the infrastructure bill. And so there's a group that has put together some language to send to your representatives to make sure that is high on the agenda. The thing is with legislators in Washington, as I'm sure this is true in the state, is they have loads of priorities. infrastructure to connectivity, we have to make sure they know those things really matter to us and that they will have a significant impact on their constituents. And that's the story, that's the message we need to make ever clearer.
Have they compared what really vans would probably suffice, maybe 2 vans versus a big bus from Wassaic to Barrington?
I know absolutely nothing about that.
But it just seems like it would be really, like, we could do that next week or so. Maybe within a month, we could have 2 vans running from Wassaic to Barrington.
If somebody wants to strike that,
I will do
yeah,
that. I mean,
yeah.
I live through the Brooklyn.
yeah, yeah, I don't know, I mean, I actually I think I put a Q&A about that in one of our, one of our documents, because it does come up now and then, why can't we do this one? Well, somebody has to do it, and the way that government works is not exactly the sort of most obvious and direct route. There's lots of, there are a lot of moving parts. But you can have impact as citizens by writing to not just your legislators, but by sharing your thoughts on this in newspaper articles, because it does, you need to tell your stories. You need to share your opinions. And really I see the role of the trade campaign as providing some, a sort of boost, and the facts that you need, because this should be fact-based. This is about, it's what I love. I was an English major, so it's really fun to do something that's about, gravel and steel and, it's all about measurements and, accuracy. And engineering. It's engineering. And so, it is important that we understand things do cost money. And in fact, I'll tell you a story. We thought we were going to have an old passenger car here on display. The Danbury Museum offered us one. But it just wasn't in shape, and they couldn't get the insurance, and there are FRA regulations, Federal Railroad Administration regulations, and they couldn't do it. When you run a train line, you can't just throw a car on the line and start driving it up and down. It has its own set of complications.
Is it available in Danbury, if we were to go to?
Oh yeah, I should say, okay, because we're gonna wrap up now. There is a railroad museum here, so you can go and look at, I haven't been there, look at stuff and buy train gear. And there's a rail museum in Danbury, in the old station, that's actually really, really great. We did some filming there, and it has old train cars that you can get on and get a sense of what they are. What kind of train cars we'll have on this line is hard to say. There are some in Vermont, there's a company that's restoring old train cars. The kind of, in Europe, I remember, changing trains someplace in the north of England, and you stop at a station and you look up and you find your platform, and you just get onto this one carriage that sits there, and once it's got a reason, once the time of departure comes, it just takes off by itself. So that kind of thing exists. Or we may have more, conventional multi-car trains as we see on Metro North. That is yet to be determined.
Carl Dunham from New Milford. I'm 77. I've lived in New Milford all my life. I think it's interesting. You look at this whole notion of passenger service, and I've watched it over the years. I actually think this point in time is a perfect time to move forward. There's kind of a synergy on a lot of issues. What troubles me always is, the lack of energy on behalf of a lot of what goes on in Connecticut. There's always a reason. But it seems to me that this is the time to move forward. Smitty, I think what Massachusetts did under Deval Patrick was very precocious, very smart, advanced, and I see no reason why we can't do the same thing from Danbury up to New Milford. Robert has had this thought of having it be an intermodal, so that not only do you go from point A to point B at the end, but you stop along the way. So So now it creates all sorts of cultural advantages, the ability to move, to stop. There's all sorts of things that go into the quality of life. And economically, it works.
Yeah.
What troubles me is it seems with rescue funds and the different funds that are going on out of the pandemic, is there a way of somehow or rather capturing enough energy to get this done now?
I have talked to your Congresswoman's office. I'm on the council for the Rail Passengers Association, which is national, so that gave me a chance to meet, and your Congresswoman is Jahanna Hayes. And she has spoken about her concern about infrastructure and especially about the issues of equity. This is her district. She is a representative for us in the House of Representatives of Washington. My congressman in Western Massachusetts is Richard Neal, who is the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. It was a very, very senior position in the House. We need to see Congresswoman Hayes really working with
I've called a couple
Rep
times
Neal.
on that issue.
She is the person here in terms of the federal funds, as well as the senators, and I've spoken to their offices as well. And we may have an event, because I think we should get them all up to Northwestern Connecticut. Right?
I think she would be
get up
key.
here. So yes, so this is, she will be a key person for you, and it is absolutely vital. I'm not interesting to her. I mean, it's you people who vote for her or don't vote for her every 2 years who really matter. And she just needs to know what you care about. Nice. Oh,
Yeah, Don Torn from Norfolk. We're kind of new to this whole train discussion, but we enthusiastically support the ability to get to New York City. But I'm interested in your comment about the website with suggestions on editorial contact. But the more you can make it easier for people like us to lobby and be activists, like for example, the Vote Forward project made a big difference in Georgia. It could make a big difference for this issue as well.
Has anyone used our kind of automated emails? In the
Okay.
past, you have where you can click and it opens on our website.
That I
No, you
I haven't
haven't.
done
Okay,
the
so you
website.
haven't been on our website. We actually have done this. Smitty's probably been the recipient of some. But we sort of pop up and the draft letter's there.
Oh,
that
good.
You can
Great.
then edit. So yes,
Yeah, we'll
I
do
do
that.
know, I know the HTML code for that. Hi, Bob.
Hi, my name's Bob Rush. I've had connections to Milford like Carl for 77 years. I've been asked to speak on behalf of Mayor Pete Bass, who couldn't make it
Oh, good.
today.
Oh,
And I told him what I was gonna say, and he said, sounds good to me. He supports every effort. But I'm one of the founders of the Rail Service Restoration Society in New Milford. I was on the last passenger train to New Milford in 1971 in the summer. And then they had a meeting after that train ride in Town Hall, and I was the only person that showed up, because everyone said, oh, we gotta go home, the kids are in the car, blah, blah, blah. So, that was the end of it.
I'm glad, because I know I've met and spoken with Mayor Bass before, and we need his support and the support of the state representatives and state senator down there.
And I've been a part of many studies from HEFCO to the Washington Group, which surprised me, was in 1986. Holy cow.
The history of this is very interesting, and I think to some extent we don't want to do too much to promote yet further studies to delay things.
We had
But we
studies
need
on-
to build on the work that's been done and bring it together, bring things to fruition. This is our time. this is the time.
All the studies say yes, yes, yes.
So,
Good for the
So-
environment, good for the economy,
yeah,
and, you know, we just have to get more than the people in this room to
correct.
push ahead.
Well, I am glad to say that CTSB has filmed this, so it's gonna be available, so you'll be able to share this in a recording of this event. And please make sure that you're on our mailing list. A very easy way, just grab one of the cards at the back. There are some of my cards and the little cards for the train campaign that are a ticket, train ticket.
But
And they have a
especially
map
right-
on the
yeah,
back.
Especially right now with our president.
That's
talking
right.
about infrastructure and.
That's right. No, this is the time we have opportunity. Now, I don't know if our speakers need to rush off, and we will have to give up this room. if Someone else has.
But even last night on the news, the mayor of Windsor, Connecticut, saying how much the train has helped his economy, and it's plus to everyone.
So, I'm not sure if the speakers will be able to stay around, but I will be at the back, and look forward to continuing. Thank you very much for, Robert,